They start out like leeches. I was so tired of it. They start out the most popular person in the world, make a lot of money, big house, cars, and everything, end up with penniless. It is conspiracy. Do it on purpose. Don't like leeches. I was so tired of it. They start out the most popular person in the world, make a lot of money, big house, cars, and everything, end up with penniless. It is conspiracy. The Jews do it on purpose.
Well, we got a comedian in the studio for this one. Brazilian comedian sentenced to 8 years in prison for bigoted jokes. That's right, 8 years in prison for bigoted jokes. Washington Post has a story on this. By the end of his act, which quickly went viral and has collected more than 3 million views on YouTube, Leo Lins had made fun of black and indigenous people, obese people, elderly people, gay people, Jews, Northeastern Brazilians, evangelicals, disabled people, and those with HIV. Wow. Could be a Medal of Freedom recipient up in these parts. Now he faces 8 years and 3 months in prison. Standing before the audience in a red shirt emblazoned with the words, "Ha ha," the comedian warned the audience that he wasn't going to hold back. "I make jokes about everything and everyone," the comedian Leo Lins said during his set in mid-2022. "What show could be more inclusive? I even hired a sign language interpreter just to be able to offend the deaf mute." Calling his comedy bigoted and discriminatory against minority and vulnerable groups, a judge in the Sao Paulo State Criminal Court on Tuesday convicted him of practicing or inciting racism and religious prejudice, as well as discrimination against people with disabilities. "Freedom of expression is not absolute nor unlimited," Judge Barbara de Lima Isepi wrote in her decision. "When there is a confrontation between the fundamental precept of liberty of expression and the principles of human dignity and judicial equality, the latter should win out." Now, that is just, of course, a very, very warped way of thinking about human dignity, equality in the first place. The decision, which the comedian plans to appeal, marks the latest effort by the Brazilian judiciary to place limits on freedom of expression, especially on social media. In recent years, the country's Supreme Court has repeatedly moved to block and remove the online accounts of people it alleged were spreading misinformation that could endanger Brazilian democracy. The country has also assumed an increasingly hard-line position against racist speech, which is considered a crime in Brazil, unlike in the United States. While the laws, have been on the books for many years, it is only recently that they have been aggressively enforced. Prosecutors have opened thousands of criminal cases. Penalties have been stiffened. Yeah, it is true. There are a lot of countries that have laws that prevent you from spreading hatred or, inciting hatred against certain groups, as we discussed with, Max Blumenthal on the last week's show. People in our line of work are starting to, keep our eyes open to see about, hey, where we might have to bug out to if the time comes. So I've been looking around, and a lot of these countries are like, we're great on freedom of expression, except you can't say you hate people. Okay, well, then that's not really being great at freedom of expression. Especially I
can't do it. I hate too many people.
Well, that's true. Well, especially knowing that, there's this campaign of Zionism that's out to basically categorize any criticism of Israel as hatred against a group, right? Prosecutors have opened thousands of criminal cases. Penalties have been stiffened. Last year, social media provocateur Day McCarthy was sentenced to 8 years in prison after she made racist comments about the black child of a white celebrity couple. Like Lins, she has been allowed to remain free as she appeals the ruling. Yes, she's not a danger to anyone. I mean, that ought to tell you right there. If she's free to, live and work while the ruling is being appealed, doesn't that prove that speech is not really a direct threat to anybody? That you can kind of live with assholes making jokes that you don't like? Even in a country that has long defined freedom of speech more narrowly than other places, Lins's conviction has been met with significant pushback. Voices across Brazilian society, including columnists, free speech advocates, conservative politicians, and progressive comedians, have united to condemn the ruling as an unjust infringement on civil liberties. It's absolutely justified to repudiate his jokes. They're in terrible taste, read an editorial in O Globo, a leading newspaper.
Everyone's a critic.
Don't put anyone at risk. They're jokes, not crimes. Jamil Assis of the Civis Institute, a free speech think tank in Curitiba in southern Brazil, says there has been a rise in what he calls modern judges who are moving to remove protections historically granted to satirical speech. He described the emerging legal precedent as dangerous to society. In Brazil, we're more careful to protect the dignity of certain groups, he said, but humor is very important discourse for a democratic society that values freedom of expression. In a video posted Thursday evening to Lindsay's YouTube page, which has 1.6 million followers, the comedian responded to the ruling against him. This video is not a joke, he said. This is Leonardo de Lima Borges Lins, not the comedian Leo Lins, a comedic character created over many years that makes acerbic jokes. So this is the video he posted to his YouTube channel, which has 3.5 million views. I have an AI clip generator and subtitle translator, so I was able to translate a little bit of it. So we'll watch a couple minutes of it, and I will read along. This video is not a joke. I'm at home with my cats. Here is the person, Leonardo de Lima Borges Lins, and not the comedian Leo Lins, holds up his costume. A comic character created over the years who makes acerbic critical jokes and who knows that not all jokes are for all people. Maybe not everyone knows, but the comedian on stage plays a character, a comic character. In the construction of the text, we use language figures, hyperbole, metaphor, irony, and an aesthetic license. And not a literal analysis of this text does not apply to the structure of the comic. This is not my opinion. This is one of the humor concepts, according to the author Simon Crickley, an author with several works about comedy and a respected name in the area in the United States and in the world. Why am I quoting this? Because it is to be expected that a heavy sentence like this has an equally deep theoretical foundation. We are experiencing one of the greatest epidemics of recent times, that of rational blindness. Judgments are made purely based on emotion, and no one wants to listen to the next one. They want to convince him of their own truth. This can bring consequences for anyone, but in the case of a judge, it can bring very serious consequences, obviously. So I find it interesting that I guess he has to, because of the laws in that country. He has to make the defense that, hey, I'm not actually expressing opinions. This is performance art, right? Now, to a certain extent, being an artist on stage affords you a certain license to say something that you couldn't necessarily say off stage, right? I always thought that was kind of funny. If you're in the audience and you get up and scream something, it can be interpreted differently than if you're the one on the stage, because that's considered art. There's a sort of facade that you're putting up, or what you're saying is not meant to be taken literally, much less seriously in a comic sense, not necessarily. But he has to make that defense because of the laws being what they are in that country. And it is just really, really bizarre and Orwellian to see that a comedian would have to issue that kind of defense of his craft, staring down an 8-year sentence. 8 years.
Yeah, you're not talking like a 3-month sentence.
Yeah, you're not talking about 90 days, some community service. You could talk it down, whatever. He said Brazil was going too far in prosecuting speech with rulings based on emotion, in which no one wants to hear the person next to them but convince them of their own truth. The comic, who has millions of followers on social media, has long sought to test the limits of free speech and common decency. Secret Jokes was the name of one set. Another was called simply Disturbing. In 2022, a judge ordered him to pay about $8,000 to the mother of an autistic child he had offended. He soon generated more controversy by joking about a child with hydrocephalus, believed to be associated with mosquito-borne Zika virus. man, this guy has very sophisticated jokes. He has hydrocephalus material as a scientist. In his disturbing act that same year, he made light of his legal issues. I like this crowd, Lynn said, after the audience laughed at one of his jokes. You're complicit in a crime. I'm going to use you all at trial. While many have risen to Lynn's defense, some have defended the decision against him. Fabio Desasesnik, an attorney with Brazilian law firm CQSF, told Folha de São Paulo there must be limits on freedom of expression. Harming the dignity of someone else is equally important, he said. No,
Can't we go back to dueling?
Whatever happened to sticks and stones? Whatever happened to that? And because certainly nothing brings more dignity to a marginalized person than being able to censor the thoughts of someone who disagrees with them or makes it. I feel so dignified. I got to imprison someone for thinking something bad about me. That's the opposite of dignity. That turns you into that's what authoritarian Nazis do. And so anyway, go ahead. I mean, if under this kind of thinking, Don Rickles would be in prison. Andrew Dice Clay would be in prison, and so would Mel Brooks for Springtime with Hitler. I mean, this is completely, but this is exactly where censorship leads, and it's always done under the guise of we're protecting someone. Right. So that's why free speech has to be an absolute.
Yeah, and I would have. I mean, I agree with all that, but I would just even argue, just even more broadly, like, no, someone's sense of dignity is not more important than free speech, than freedom of expression. Like, if you feel your dignity's been violated, all right, I mean, that sucks. But does that mean I should have my freedom taken away? You should lock me in a cage for making you feel undignified? Like, that's insane. That's insane. Of course, people's personal sense of dignity is not more important than the freedom of everyone in the group.
So now anybody can say my personal sense of dignity has been taken away by this joke. You need to imprison that. And by the way, isn't that the exact opposite message to send to a child or anybody, that someone has the power to take your dignity away? I think, didn't Whitney Houston sing that song? They can't take away my dignity. You can only give it away. They can't take it from you.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, you couldn't do any crowd work. I mean, seriously, like, forget it. That'd be out the window. Right. How could you do crowd work in Brazil? The whole thing,
and by the way, let's say that there's a comedian doing nothing but pure hate speech. My question is, and I asked this on stage, why am I not allowed to hate shit? Why I'm a grown-ass man. Why can't I hate shit? Why can't I hate white guys doing Taco Tuesday? Why can't I hate Israel? Why can't I hate Zionism and the slaughter of children? Why don't I get to hate shit? And if I don't get to hate shit, then we don't have freedom at all. I don't have the dignity of my own thoughts. You get to invade my thoughts and imprison me for a thought crime, because that's what that is. So my personal dignity requires that I have free speech and I'm allowed to hate shit. Why can't I hate Hitler? Why can't I hate not? Why do I have to have permission from the state on what I hate?
Of course. Of course.
I was very surprised to see this come out of Brazil. I don't think we think of Brazil as Carnival, right? I mean,
here's the thing.
I did not know they had laws like this.
Well, Lula has not been good on speech, and I like a lot of what Lula's about, but he has not been good on this issue, which, as I mentioned on our show, is an automatic fail. Like what Trump is doing to Mahmoud Khalil, I find that to be an automatic fail. That's like on a road test, you make a left in front of oncoming traffic. This is really horrible. So Glenn Greenwald, who lives in Brazil, obviously knows a thing or two about this. Brazil's censorship regime has been so worth watching because it illustrates how rapidly core free speech rights can be essentially abolished in a democratic country almost overnight. It was only a few years ago when Brazil's Supreme Court seized what it admitted were extraordinary censorship powers to combat what it called the emergency of the Bolsonaro movement. Like most temporary emergency powers seized by the state, these censorship powers are now effectively permanent, the same trajectory as the 2002 Patriot Act. The power to censor is intoxicating. Brazil's emergency powers are now, just a few years later, regularly used to criminalize common and even mild criticisms of the court and the government as attacks on democracy itself. All the cheering and justifying of this authoritarianism quickly fostered a broader culture where once unthinkable repression, like the example below, shocking for now to most of the democratic world, is now expected. No country is exempt from this dynamic once the systematic state censorship train is permitted to leave the station. And this came to a head just last year when Brazil banned the X app. So Lula says Elon Musk's wealth does not mean the world must accept his far-right free-for-all. I'll just read a couple paragraphs. The Brazilian president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has said he hopes the crisis surrounding social network X in Brazil might teach the world that it isn't obliged to put up with Elon Musk's far-right free-for-all just because he is rich. The suspension was first ordered on Friday as a result of the company's refusal to obey court orders requiring the removal of profiles accused of spreading disinformation and for the social network to name a local legal representative. So some people tried to paint this as, well, it's just a bureaucratic step. You have to have a legal point of contact down there. No, they were also demanding that X censor more. And of course, X did not want to censor more. And so they had that standoff. And here is Lula at the time defending this. This voice is dubbed in English with subtitles. It's not his actual voice, but this is a translation.
Part of the world who has investments in Brazil is subject to the Brazilian constitution and Brazilian laws. Therefore, if the Supreme Court makes a decision that a citizen must comply with certain things, they either comply or have to take other action. Just because someone has a lot of money doesn't mean they can disrespect the rules. This citizen is an American citizen, not a global citizen. He can't keep offending the presidents, offending the deputies, offending the Senate, offending the chamber, offending the Supreme Court. Who does he think he is? And repeat it, okay? So here's the deal, man. He needs to respect the decision of the Brazilian Supreme Court. If he wants to fine, if not, too bad. If he's...
And he did. He did end up caving.
Yeah.
Elon ended up caving on that. Yeah.
So, I mean, I used to be a big Lula fan, and there's nothing that is more evident when he says things like that he is definitely under the thumb of the deep state and the oligarchy that controls most of the Western world, because there's no way he truly believes that stuff. And, you know, they did exactly to Bolsonaro what they did to Donald Trump on January 6th. They created an insurrection to make it illegal for him to run for president, and Bolsonaro was able to become president again. And the reason why he was let out of jail and let that happen was because he made a deal with who knows? Is it the international bankers? Is it the CIA? I think it's that is the deep state. And so, he's 100% compromised, and anything good that he gets done, he's being allowed to get done.
Yeah, it's really horrible. It really is horrible because, when we talked to Max Blumenthal about possibly fleeing the country, there was a clip that got put up on the show. I got to admit, the thing I most value in a society when I'm, shopping myself around thinking, hey, if shit gets real and it comes to that, if I got to go somewhere, the thing I value above all is freedom of speech. Now, that's partly because I make a living running my big fucking mouth. So I understand not everybody is in the same boat as me, but it really just is. It's a very different way of thinking about society. Like it's something that we kind of take for granted in America, even though these freedoms are being eroded here. And so that's what makes it very scary. Like there really is no hiding from it. That's what Greenwald said in that tweet. He says, once that train gets moving, there's no hiding from it, especially in the online world, because Michael Schellenberger has talked a lot about this. What these countries will do is they will implement draconian censorship policies to get the tech companies to adjust their platform terms of service to be in accordance with the most pro-censorship countries. Yeah. And then because most tech people are lazy fucks who ultimately don't want to work, they'll just apply that as a standard blanket all around the world. So you'll have, a company perhaps implement censorship so they can remain active in a market like Brazil. And then they'll just leave that standard up for all users around the world to make it easier for them.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of leaving the country, obviously I'm torn as anybody would be. I definitely keep thinking of Casablanca, part of the message of which is you can't escape from it, right? It'll find you wherever you go. When this kind of thing is afoot in the world, at some point you're gonna have to plant your flag and fight. So yes, I suspect, because look, we talked about this. A lot of people in our space go to Brazil. It's part of why I was surprised about this, because I assume that's part of why Nico's there. It's part of why Glenn's there. And look what's going on there. So you could go and emigrate to get away from what's happening in the United States, and especially because of the footprint the United States has.
Well, yeah.
What makes you think what happens here won't happen in any country you escape to, unless you go to one that really is an enemy of the United States, which in all likelihood is going to have its own limits on free speech.
Right. Exactly. All right. Are we wrapped on that? Should we move on?
I think so.
All right, cool. Sparky says Putin is actually a righteous man. People in the West are brainwashed that Putin is bad because of 25 years of relentless Western propaganda, including false flags. Break it off in BlackRock, make Ukraine Russia again. Thank you, Sparky. I hope I'm not screwing this up. I don't think I am, but it seems like there's more. Oh, here, make Ukraine Russia again. Don't leave a rump state called Ukraine, lest it remain a NATO playground, a carpetbagger's money laundry, and a BlackRock property. Sparky again. It's become fashionable for parents to say their nerd kid is autistic instead of signing them up for sports or charm school. True autism is rare. Man, you're an old-fashioned guy, Sparky. Charm school. I haven't heard anybody talk about charm school a long time. I probably used to talk about charm school. Sarah Simone. The funding is massive, all laid out in the Jennifer Billick book, Transsexual, Transgender, Transhuman. Eric Husseau says, where are all the trans men in men's sports? I bet young male athletes wouldn't mind seeing a little meow meow in the locker room before the big game. There you go. All right.